Well, good morning, everyone. I had some technical difficulties last time, so please let me know if I'm being muted at any point during the session. And maybe if someone could just let me know they can hear me, that would be great. Hope everyone's doing well this morning. Here in Newfoundland, it's a bit dark and dreary, so hoping for some sunshine sooner than later. Thank you, Petra. Appreciate that for letting me know you can hear me. Excellent. So today we're going to finish up negotiations, and it's a quite a large topic, and it's very individual. So I'm hoping you can pull away some individual things that you can work on yourselves, whether it's with a colleague or a client, etc. I think one of the big things, even just negotiating with my daughter this morning, it's amazing how negotiating with my daughter, as an example, I was thinking about it, I thought, I know her interests. I know exactly what she needs based on that. But at the same token, needless to say, the emotions kick in a bit more and the frustration kicks in a bit more on my end. So I certainly had some bias and I wasn't negotiating extremely effectively this morning, which I'm sure if anyone has kids, they've had the negotiations around technology and homework and all those lovely pieces, the deals that we strike with our children. So it's funny, I was thinking, I think I failed this morning. So it is a tough topic. It's something that unless you're a trained negotiator and you do it every day, we are going to have some failures. So the key here, I think, is to just hold on to at least 2 or 3 things new to you, maybe a little different, or maybe just some more self-awareness that may help moving forward, whether it's with a difficult client, difficult colleague, or even family for that matter. So, all right, so we're going to move into so negotiation. We talked a little bit about, what it's all about a little bit last time. We're going to just finish up on the process piece. I'm going to skip through a few slides depending on time, because I've got a lot of information, but I'll give you the ones that you need to see and hear to understand in terms of the strategies and skills and the art of it. So there's lots of things and tips and tricks that I really want to get out to you today, and hopefully some of those will resonate with you. So just a couple of refreshers. So we had some of the styles and strategies, and again, we'll talk a little bit about more individual styles in this session. So we have a win-lose, a win-win, a lose-win, a lose-lose. So we never ever go in to assume, we're going to do a lose-lose, right? And we always say, we'd love to go in with a win-win, right? And some people are more competitive and they kind of go, I kind of like a win. I don't care if they lose, depending on the situation, of course. So again, it's really understanding what your objective is, and what your natural style is. We talked last time as well about BATNA. Now, BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And we'll go for the worst one as well in a second. BATNA is really important to understand because if you're going into something, it can't be a make or break. It can't be this is all there is. There has to be analysis done in advance around what is our alternative if this doesn't work. Because it helps set your base around when you're going to walk away. It helps set your base around, specifics that you can't alter or you can't have another alternative solution. So it's really important to have that in your head, whether it's just a small negotiation between colleagues, just to understand, okay, so this doesn't work, what can I do? And it gives I find with clients of mine, whether they're negotiating salaries, for example, with employees or taking on new employment, it's really around, okay, so what's the alternative? What's the worst case scenario as well? So in terms of what is your whatnot? So the worst alternative. So what's the worst thing that could possibly happen if this doesn't work? And again, like I said last time, it's really a matter of understanding that. Can you deal with that? Is it something you can come back from? So you understand that's the worst of the worst and the best alternative, and then you have a sense of your boundaries when you go into that negotiation. And again, when you go in, your ZOPA. So what's your zone of possible agreement? What can you possibly agree on? It could be how you work with the client. It could be the values around the organization. There's lots of things you can have that can relate. It could be around a team member or negotiating time for something, whatever it might be. Where can you actually agree on something? So those are some of the language pieces around negotiations. And whether you like the language or not, the concepts hopefully you can resonate with. Now, what makes a successful negotiation? Just pop in the chat. Just let me know if there's anything that stands out. If you walk away from a negotiation and go, that was successful. Throw out a few things that you think that could be. Ooh, love that. Feeling respected and listened to. Yes, I think, if you think about it from a client or a colleague perspective, a family, of course, I think that's great comment. Feeling, because one of the things with negotiations is this a one-time shot? I'm over negotiating with a Turkish rug supplier in Turkey. I'm over in Kushadasi and I'm trying to negotiate, which I did years ago, negotiate a price. Right? I'm never going to see this person again. But again, feeling respected and listened to. Maybe if it's not really comfortable there, does it really matter because I'm gone off on the ship after the fact? I'm never going to see these people again. Or is this, on the majority of time, this is a relationship you want to continue? So I love that one. Thank you for that. Anything else? Come on, there's got to be something else that you want to walk away with in a negotiation. What else could it be? And I forgot to remind everyone to make sure you're on mute as well. Unless you want to speak up, feel free. Come on, there's got to be some competitive folks out there. What do you want to do when you're in a negotiation? Win. Thank you. Yes, there's an element of getting what you need. Again, not saying it's not a compromise because that often occurs. So yeah, I mean, how do you win? How do you get what you need? So how do you meet your own interests? Theirs acceptably and others tolerably, which is a great quote, enough to be durable. So how do you get it so that everyone feels like they got a bit of a win? If you're going and negotiating on a price somewhere, or you're going wherever, it's nice to know that they got something, acceptable, but you met your interests. What you really needed to walk away with, it really worked. And it's the best of the options. The ideal scenario, right? You had all these options and you walked away with the best. Doesn't always happen, but it certainly makes for a successful negotiation. And it's better than your BATNA, right? So that's the whole point of coming up with the best alternative, is that if I know my best alternative, for example, is, I don't know if it's with regard to which companies, right? So if you're going to which underwriters, who can give you the best for your client? Maybe this one, well, what's the best alternative, right? What can you guys handle in terms of margins? What can you actually make money at, as an example? So those can all play into this as well. It's legitimate. It's a real negotiation. It was not, you don't feel like it was just there for show. It was a legitimate process. It doesn't damage the relationship, which I really love the comment there about respect. So there's clarity of communication. You know what happens. There's clarity around agreement. There's clarity around what are next steps to solidify it. So it's specifics, and there's firm and implementable. So it's going to move ahead. You know how, you know why, and there's no question marks. That right there is absolutely a successful negotiation. Doesn't always happen, but that's what you want to strive for right there. And the key there as well, when you talk about relationships, is trust. I mean, if they're clients or colleagues or your boss or whoever it is, trust is really critical. So if we go in and we have that, I'm going to win at all costs, there is probably going to be an impact on the relationship, on the trust, your credibility with that person, right? Is it really worth that? And oftentimes when we're really desperate for something, or we feel that we're desperate for something, we can really go a little bit too far. And repairing that relationship can be really challenging. And of course, in your market, whether internal client or external client, your brand is everything, right? If you're seen as someone who maybe the person doesn't feel good about it, I'm not going to go back to a store if I feel like I was cheated. I didn't get anything of what I wanted, or I was desperate and they took advantage, right? So trust is really, really critical. Now, just as critical, though, is preparation. So when you think about preparation, what are some things that you can actually do? So you prepare first, and then you start talking and exchanging information, then you actually bargain, and then you close and settle. So those are the basic, nothing surprising there. So in preparation, I think one of the big pieces is every single time you go in to negotiate with a client or whoever it is, they're all different. Every single one, it's not like you're going to use the same approach with every single person. So you really have to be aware of two different things. You have to be aware of what you need, your natural style, what may get in the way, so the self-awareness. You also might, from a self-awareness, have to understand the other person. So if you have a relationship with this person and maybe it's a bit challenged, or maybe this is your most difficult client, how's that going to get in the way of your own self-awareness? So how am I going to act differently? Am I going to come across a little bit more aggressive or less aggressive? Maybe I'm accommodating too much. So understanding that and understanding how to get around that. One suggestion there as well, if you find it's a really challenging client, which I've done actually, is have a colleague. So I've got one colleague of mine she can be tough when she needs to be. She's lovely and she's caring in all those pieces, but she can be tougher than me. So sometimes I could bring her in to make sure I hold my line, right? So if I know my line is at X in terms of, for example, I'm negotiating right now with a contract with a client in terms of services, and I'll go to her and sort of say, oh, yeah, this is what I'm thinking. She's like, Heather, you're giving away the farm now. Come on, right? You don't come to work for free. So, so just having her as that person, that base person. So depending on the person, having an extra person there, whether they're in the room or to talk to and prepare with, is really helpful. Understanding the other party, right? What are their needs? What are their styles? Is this a person that has to win? Right? That's a challenging one. So they're going to be very positional. They're going to say, here's my position. I'm sticking to it. Suck it up, buttercup, if you want the business. Right? So we'll talk a little bit about that as we get through the session today. And be prepared to adapt. You may go in and you may be surprised, right? But go in prepared and modify as needed through the process. So if you actually look at concepts to win, so for a win-win negotiation. So you've got pausing for reflection, searching for needs, right, which kind of plays into that. So you're pausing and thinking, what's happening? What do I want? What are the needs of myself? What are the needs of others? I've got some questions here to show you as well. Your objectives, how you place your information out on the table, what you actually agree on, and controlling the outcome. So what can you actually control, right? What comes out at the end? So for each of those, when you pause for reflection, so what do you want to get out of it? What resistance do I think I'm going to have? How do I get over those? So if I get resistance and I bring my colleague in, that might be a bit helpful. So that might be, how do I start strategizing that? In the needs, what are my needs? What are their needs? What do we actually have in common? Because win-win is about everyone getting what they want, give or take, okay? What are the biggest gaps? That's what you have to start looking at. There's common ground you're going to look at, but there's also what are the big gaps, because one of those big gaps could mean everything to the person, the other party. So you really have to start thinking about that. So clarifying up front. So when you're actually doing this sort of approach, a win-win approach, which is a little bit more of a participative bargaining as an example in bargaining or integrative negotiating, the other words which I brought up before, what are the most important issues that need to be discussed? Right? What do they have? What are the levels of potential outcomes? Like clarifying objectives up front. What is it you want to achieve? What do you want to get? What can they get? What can they achieve? I know what their needs are, so what can they achieve here? What makes the most sense? In terms of factual information, there's a lot of things that come out in negotiations that get quite emotional, which we'll talk about as well today. There's also things that come out where there's a lot of assumptions made. And we've talked about this in different sessions for different reasons. We have bias. We read things in people. Are we actually listening, and are we actually opening our minds to figuring out what is stopping someone? So one great thing I learned from a sales perspective years ago was, so what's the one thing that could bring you to where we are? What's the one thing that could make us have an agreement today? Right? What's the one thing stopping that for you? Right? Just a little question sometimes, and actually listening and working with the person can make all the difference in the world. But oftentimes we get quite biased, right? We actually don't go that far. So control the outcome, yeah. So you've negotiated, you've got the needs, you've got clarified up front, your objectives, what all that's going to be. What the actual information, what are the actual pieces that I know? I'm not being biased, I'm really being open, I'm curious, I'm non-judgmental. I want to understand what's underneath things so we can discuss them and explore them. This all sounds great in theory, I know. And then what can you control in the end, right? Say you've negotiated the basic things. What are some things? Is it timing you can control? Is it how you communicate something or how you work with them? Outcomes can also be, depending on your need, can also be, I don't want just one piece of business from this person. I want another piece. So maybe it's around communicating or getting an introduction to someone in the business. Oh gosh, we're going to be doing this work with you. I'd love to meet the CEO, or I'd love to meet somebody. So it's really good to start thinking about that outcome piece and how it plays into your initial needs. So you've got your range, you've got your idea of what you're going in, you've got your percentages. Where's the premium going to look? What's it going to look like? What margins have you got? What is it? What are you seeing in the market, right? What's your range? What's your starting position? Where's your target and ideal scenario? And again, where do you walk away? So that's all prepared. That's all in the preparation stages. You've got all that mapped out. Then you start information exchange. So this is just a quote, I guess, I got. So successful negotiators ask twice the number of questions and spend over twice the amount of time acquiring and clarifying information than do average negotiators. You and I are not experienced negotiators. I negotiate, absolutely. I've done work in negotiation, I've read on negotiation, but I am not out there negotiating day after day, large complex projects or anything like that. So knowing this can really make a difference. So how do you go in with a curious mind, with an interest, asking questions, understanding, even in the business, when you think about it, when I've seen in your industry, when some of the best people I've seen actually will ask questions, understand the business better through those questions, and that helps them reframe why something is important, why they need a certain, oh, that's interesting, because I can see how this coverage could really help you. But you'd never know until you ask the questions and you really listen, you understand their challenges, what keeps them up at night, right, from a risk perspective. So again, asking questions and actually listening is really, really critical. And I know I've said that in so many ways, but it's one of the top skills, I think, in this day and age. So based on all that, kind of a little segue into what makes a good negotiator. Throw in just a couple of skills or characteristics you think that would work well to be a good negotiator. Ooh, nice. Patience. Petra. Now, Petra's been very lovely in putting these in. See if we, oh, Jeremy, thanks. Confidence. Yes, actually. And if you've done your prep work in advance and you know what you're going in with and you're confident in your offering, right, what you're presenting, you've gone to market, you know your stuff, you know what's out there, right? The confidence in that, the confidence that I know your business and I know that we can help you. I think that's brilliant. And confidence as a professional, you know your stuff. So that's really helpful. Unbiased, love that. Yes, bias plays into this a lot. And I think knowing even when you are biased is really critical. So walking in going, ooh, it's really triggering me when he says that or she says that, or, oh, they're getting really snippy over there. Well, aren't we just this? You can just almost hear it in your head, the sarcasm or the comments or whatever, knowing that there's bias playing out. There's judging playing out. That's really great. Thanks, Beverly. There's a lot of care. I'll just throw some up here for time. So good listener, which I mentioned as well. Open and flexible. There's clear objectives. So you actually have the ability to set out your objectives and you can put them to your own team if it's a team that's negotiating. Good communicator is a big beast of a word, but you get clarity in terms of how you communicate. There's no miscommunication. Empathize. The caring piece plays into it too. Sometimes emotions can really play into negotiations. Knowing that somebody's getting really upset about something, there's fear, there's anger, maybe finances aren't great and every penny counts. So having the ability to say, look, I know that, that one coverage is expensive and I know that's the best we can get you. We went out to 5 markets. That's the best we could get you. But this is why it's really worth investing in this. I can understand how stressful it must be to think about that, that $1 figure. But let's talk about it, right? What's the risk if you don't? So, but again, empathizing or saying, I know it's challenging and, I know this is really tough, really understanding and being able to empathize. It also helps you not judge them as well. Knowledgeable, decisive, trust in yourself, which helps with the confidence as well. The value of the relationship, really understanding the creative, absolutely, right? Because how many times have you ever been stuck? And I've got a slide here on the impasse, right? They're saying this and you're saying this and there's nowhere to go. How can you think outside the box? How do you bring it to a new perspective? Ethical plays heavily from a trust perspective. Be assertive as needed. This is one of my things that I have to work on. I'm not good holding the line. So as I said earlier, so being assertive when you need to be and really understanding the value of what you bring, right? Understanding that line that you need to hold. And emotional intelligence, this plays into the empathizing as well, patience, persistence, self-confidence, and reject constructively. So, if somebody says something and you just go, oh, that's not going to work, that's not very constructive. How can you say, I'm not sure that's going to work? So what you can also do is redirect and say, I'm just wondering if we could do something over here instead. That one piece is something that, we can't really maneuver, but we could certainly look at this. So you can redirect people. You can sort of say, I understand where you're going from there, but on our end, that's not something that we can do. Or it could be, for example, they're negotiating services and they want you to consult with them on certain things and they want it for free. There's things that you just have to say, that's not something we can offer as such, but we can certainly negotiate a very reasonable price for that, right? So how do you do it in a way that comes from a rejection over to something that you can actually work on? Now, the different styles, you would have seen this before in a different context for those of you that have been on a lot of the calls, and this plays into conflict management, okay? And it also plays into negotiation, believe it or not. You can use the same process or concept. There's actually assessments you can use around these. So when you look at how we naturally do it, so we all have a natural style, no different than conflict. This is sort of like a conflict, but you're negotiating. So how does it actually look? So on the side, you'll see from unassertive to assertive. So essentially, you're going from satisfying my own needs, my own concerns first. It's all about me, right? It's all about winning, as you can see in the top left. The goal is to win. So then you look at the bottom right, and it's a little opposite. My goal is to make them happy, to accommodate them. So I'm satisfying their concerns. Everyone leans different ways, right, in terms of what we go. I think we all think we want to be collaborator. We want to find the win-win. There's obviously, that's tough to do when you all get what you want. There's usually a modified version of that win-win, or it could go down to full compromising 50% as an example. So in avoiding, sometimes we just like, oh, I can't deal with that. I can't deal with that client. I just got to avoid it. I just got to put my head in the sand a little bit. So the competing folks, they tend to be, so think about yourselves, they tend to be results-oriented, self-confident, probably quite self-confident, quite assertive. They often focus on the bottom line. There's certain styles I can think of that fall into that. They can they're very vocal. They can often impose their views on the other party and be quite extreme. And to the extent where I've seen people in that category get quite aggressive and domineering. So that's the competing style. If you lean a bit that way, then you got to think about when is that effective, because sometimes you have to basically put your foot down. Having said that, how important is that relationship? So you really have to think, because there's no concern for the other party. So those that are actually avoiding, so the bottom left, so those are the folks who tend to be avoiding conflict. This is actually more common than you think, the avoiding one. They tend to pull back from the situation, maybe hand it off to someone else. Oh, can't you help out? Come on, you can help me out on this. Can't you talk to Joe today? I can't do it. They just don't actually get involved as best they can. So that's the avoiding. Hopefully people, if they do it, they only do it for a day or two. But if you're in that category, you really got to think about what's best for you, for the client, or the other party, and what's best for your organization. Because that can only go on for so long. Then you look at the accommodating. So the accommodating folks, it's all about, and I'm one of those, I lean that way, right? I tend to give away. I yield too much. So that relationship is sometimes actually overstated with the accommodators. So I want to make sure there's no conflict. I want to make sure they feel good about themselves. They feel like they've had a win, yay for them. But it certainly doesn't help me on my end. So satisfying the other person is the goal. If you look at compromising, then it's really the middle ground folks, which I tend to be sort of accommodating in certain things, and I sort of go up the right side myself personally. The compromisers sort of split the middle difference, right? So which I tend to be more of a collaborator myself and an accommodator, but it's sort of going in with the, okay, you're going to take 50%. So if I give 2%, this thing, you're going to give me 2% over here, right? Which can be just a typical way of splitting the difference between the groups. And finally, from a collaborator, they use a style, and the best collaborators I've seen in terms of negotiation, tend to be very open and honest, but they don't tell everything up front, which we'll talk about in a minute. They look at creative solutions. They understand the interests, and they really go for understanding what that person needs, and hopefully you can satisfy both parties. So it's around listening, it's around exploring new solutions, maybe taking a reframe. I've seen people do that. It's amazing. Let's just take a step back and let's look at it from a new way. So those are the different ones, and you have to think about it. Each one of those has pros and cons, right? You can be a collaborator and go in and have a person who's competitive there, and you get into a stalemate, right? So you really have to be able to move around in these as needed. But having said that, if you know where you naturally fall, that's probably where you're going to start. So is it the right approach is the question. And that's what you do in your preparation stages. What's my natural style? What do I need to go in with? And do I need a colleague there to make sure that I am the style, or we are the style that we need to be as a team, right? So this is an interesting one. It's very large with a lot of stuff in there. But the positional bargaining, so the positional negotiating, essentially, I just found this and I thought I'd put it in. But there's soft and there's hard negotiating. So again, it's not difficult to figure out, right? If you look down the side there in the second line, so the goal is agreement. And for a hard negotiator, really tough, positional, I'm going to win, right? I want to actually win. But if you look down to the fourth one there, this is what I love. So it's soft on people and the problem. So the softer folks, again, which I tend to be more softer, will actually think about the people and the problem, feel bad for people, maybe sometimes give away the farm. But the problem, yeah, I can handle it. You know, I'll just suck it up. Whereas the hard will be hard on the problem and the people. So it's not just holding firm on a piece, it's really being aggressive. So you need to be soft on the people and hard on the problem. It's a lovely blend, and that really brings you into more of that win-win approach on the right-hand side. So, you know, looking for mutual gain, focusing on interests, not positions, those are things we've already talked about. But I thought that was a lovely way of seeing it. So think about where you fall and how do you actually try to be soft on the people. If it's natural for you, that's great, but how do you stick with being hard on the problem, holding the line? Now here's where we get into the art of negotiation. So this is an interesting one. So keeping your whatnot to yourself. So if you hint to the other party, it's less likely that they're going to agree on anything more than that. So going in and just laying all your cards out on the table, and we'll have another slide on this as well, is not necessarily the best thing to do. So in terms of the people and the problems, I find this is a really tough one. As I said before, we tend to get involved. We get connected to our position, our team. It becomes more of a competition perspective. And when somebody goes against us, well, I think you're just doing it for your own gain, or they say something like that, we often will take it personally. And we can't. You have to separate the people from the issue, right? Without damaging the relationship. So emotions really play heavily into this. It can be a very frustrating process. And if some people are very vocal, like emotional intelligence, sometimes we just let it out when we shouldn't and something comes out. We often react with fear and anger. So we really need to acknowledge the fact that emotions are present. And even when it feels like you're justified, it does not help move it forward. Okay. Sometimes, as much as I always say, you know, how can you use the emotion? You can in your enthusiasm around something. Oh, I think that's a great idea. But again, when you get into the negative side, you got to be very careful because you can turn off the other person very quickly. You can provoke a response that you don't necessarily want. So it's really important to really try to separate that. And and what do you do? So say you get there, what can you do, right? How do you get yourself out of the situation? Do you regroup later? Do you have someone else there that you can sort of look at and say, you've got to take over now? Like a certain little signal that they'll take over, or an agreement in advance. So how you're going to communicate the patience that we talked about, you know, earlier with the characteristics, and being brief is really important. So if you're someone who's quite verbose, you're sort of chatty, sometimes it can get lost in translation. People don't actually know what you're asking for, what you're offering, being very clear, and sometimes having a colleague there to give you feedback after the fact, and that is excellent. We talked about the other two there. So sometimes you're going to have some broad pieces. So if I think about your world, maybe it's some coverage, maybe there's covers things, certain things you can and you can't do. Maybe it's the industry, whatever it might be. But other things specific things within that coverage that you can be a little bit flexible on, or how you deliver something, or the something on the claim side, or I don't know, whatever the heck it is that you can actually look for specifics that you can be flexible on. Seeing what else. Now, in closing it out, just in the bottom there for time, make sure that you list the agreement in detail. So write it out. It could be a follow-up email. You confirm it in the meeting, but it could be a follow-up email including specific, like, so here's what we agreed on, here's what applies, here's how, if there's an interpretation on something. So I'm going to go back and check if this actually clause is actually what it, is offering what it means, the interpretations around that. And if there's a piece that you're still negotiating on, you've put 80% of it to bed. So then have a time frame that you're actually going to restart those negotiations around that last piece to put it all to bed. Because these could be very complex ones, especially in the commercial space, if you're in that space. So what to share? There's a big one. So what do you know what to share? So you don't want to give away the farm, as I said before. You don't want to say, here's detailed statement around my position around certain issues. Oftentimes the other party wants that. They want you to put your cards on the table. But if you start doing that, you're kind of giving it away. So if they start saying something around, yeah, what do you need? Or, what do you really need? Like if I think about cars, right? So how much do you actually make on a car? What's your regular commission? Like give me your what now. I want to know what's the worst case scenario, because that's where I want to go. You can say something as well, like, that's a really, really good question. But before we get into all those components, let's make sure we agree on the issues we're talking about. Or let's make sure we're clarifying the objectives of what we want to walk out with today. So you really want to actually have a bit of avoidance. Distract, move away to another topic. You don't want to say, no, I'm not giving that to you as such. But it can be quite tricky in terms of understanding what to share. And what to keep to yourself is really, really tough. You don't want to come across as being secretive. So if you walk into a negotiation and you say, okay, so this is what we have and what we're coming for, and we're going to walk away with this. If you come in and say you need this, we're just going to walk away, right? There's no point in having a negotiation in the first place, right? There has to be flexibility. There has to be room to move. So, but if you hint early in the negotiations that you're like going to settle, or here's what we're going to do, you're basically giving them everything they want. So how do you actually come up with enough information to start out, enough information so they understand your perspectives, right? Or what you can and can't do. So quick scenario. You've been trying to negotiate terms with the client for 2 weeks and both sides are stuck. So maybe your manager's saying, no, that's it. We can't really move on that. We have a hard, firm line there. And the other side is like, well, unless you can do something about this, we can't do business. So what could you actually do at that stage? Can you think of anything you might be able to do? Anybody have any ideas? I'm sure you've been in an impasse. Oh, there you go, like that. Discuss with an outside party. Yeah. Again, how do you actually think differently? How do you actually, it's a deadlock type situation. So how do you actually get someone else's view? But sometimes we can get very firm on some things, right? We can be stuck in our ways. It just won't last. Everyone has an impasse. And sometimes we walk away from the client. Like, I'm sorry, we couldn't do business with them. But sometimes there's an ability to do other things before you actually get to that. So how do you deal with an impasse, right? How to break the impasse. So if it's around certain terms, maybe there's other things you can negotiate. So I say this to clients all the time when they're negotiating salaries and things like, oh, I'm firm, I need to make $65,000. And so I'll say, okay, well, that's fair. Like, you're what now? My worst case scenario is I can live on 54,000 or 56,000. That's my worst case, but I really need to get to 65. That's what I deserve. That's what I have. So then it's a matter of, say the organization comes out and offers this person 60,000. So then it's a matter of, okay, so what do you do? So the person's like, well, they said they can't go up. They can't do any more there. So it's a matter of, okay, do you walk away or do you negotiate other things? So you can negotiate other things in terms of in salaries and things. You can negotiate around your vacation. You can negotiate around your percentage for pension contributions if it's a group RSP. It could be around flex hours, right? There could be things that $4,000 is worth, or it could be that they come out and they say, 62 or 60, what is it worth? Right? What are some things that you can actually negotiate? So how can you be a little more creative? And then people go, yeah, okay, fair enough. For a couple $1,000s, I'll take an extra week's holidays because it's actually worth more than that. And again, change a team member. It's kind of that outside party, right? Change a team member or the team leader. So it could be helping me see new perspective. It could also be helping the client, right? Going in with a new eye, sometimes going in and someone sort of just saying, yeah, I'm just being brought in on this one and really want to make this work with you guys. Can you give me the skinny? So kind of getting their perspective, maybe making the client walk through it a bit more just to kind of make sure that you understand everything because we may have missed something. Now I keep saying this, what's your common ground? Right? What can you actually agree on? And then save the more difficult stuff for later. What's the low-hanging fruit, which is really helpful? Because then you feel like, okay, we've agreed on at least 2 things. So it's worth moving forward, right? And again, creativity. How do you brainstorm, even with your clients? How can we make this work? Let's think outside the box here. Because let's just say that you talk about it and they talk about, well, in our other company. Well, what do you mean your other company? Maybe they have another company. Maybe they have an affiliation with a company. Maybe an introduction to someone else or a different side of the business or something may be worth a percentage point, right? Or a dollar, certain dollar value. So what other options can there be that you can bring up that maybe you didn't realize before? But again, you can just walk away and say, look, why don't we come back and, you're going on holidays for a few weeks. Why don't we come back when we're, all fresh from holiday or in the summer or whatever in September, and let's talk about it again. The renewal is not due till X period of time. So maybe sometimes that stepping away makes a difference. Now, it can go negatively, but oftentimes it does go positively. So for time, I'm just going to whip through a few of these. Where are we time-wise? Time always flies. So in terms of mutual gain, so, sometimes we walk in and it feels like we're in constant opposition, right? There's someone, it's painful, it's a snail's pace, the person's not getting back to you. So what you need to do is start looking at what do we have together, right? Again, how do you expand the pie by coming up with different options, which we just talked about, right? How do you look at that ZOPA to see what you can find that's shared? Maybe, again, as I mentioned, the scope of the negotiation. So is there something else you can include, or maybe something else that you can take away? If there's one element, maybe you're working on fleece and you're working on, say, 2 buildings they own. Well, sometimes it's worth, as opposed to walking away from everything, maybe you just maintain the fleet. They went out and got a quote on something, you just can't beat it. Like there's just no way on that piece. But maybe you can hang on to the fleet, right? Maybe you can change that, or again, expand it so that you can take a smaller cut on something. So thinking about it from that way can really be helpful. Or they have 5 businesses, right? And how can you say, well, we'd love to look at some other businesses. And yeah, well, maybe we'll give you a little bit here. If we can have an opportunity to quote on that next year. Right? So how can you actually look at it for the future negotiations? So common ground, right? How do you find the common ground? It's one of the toughest things to find. Sometimes, I'm just going to throw one thing out there. It's also who you're negotiating with in the business. Sometimes they'll take their pit bull and put it forward. Sometimes it's nice to be able to have, more connections. How many connections do you actually have in a business? Do you actually understand the business? Are you getting only one viewpoint? Right? Do you only talk to the CEO? Well, who actually makes the decisions? Does the CEO go to their CFO and talk about it? Well, how can the CFO be involved? How can you get more connected to the CFO or whoever it might be? Do they have an investor, right? How do you get to understand them? Because they're going to have just as much say in it. And the common ground could play with them just as much as the person in front of you. Most places, most people will actually confer with other people as well that you're not going to be conferring with. And so it could be a matter of, if they say, oh yeah, we'll have to talk to the CFO, but oh, interesting. So what would be their impression, do you think, of this? What's the likelihood here, right? See if you can get them to open up. Oh, well, they're a real stickler for this, this, and this. Well, what would work for the CFO? Or what do you think would be helpful for them? Like understanding that information can make all the difference in the world. and understanding. And I wanted to throw this in. I had this from before, if anyone did the one on influence. So there's an element here of influence. So you're negotiating something, but there is influence. Because if I have someone who's highly credible, if my broker, I think the world of, they're highly credible, they connect when they come in, the facts are there that they've done good business for us. Yeah, maybe it's a smidge more here or there, but they're always there when we want them. The claims are working well. Their risk side is, they've got, given us lots of advice when we've purchased other companies, whatever it is. There's an influence level there. And even if anyone does negotiations is one thing, but even when people do RFPs, there's usually these days an element of how credible are these people? Do they have a history? Do we have a history with them? Do we have a trust in them? So understanding that is really critical. And again, personal lines more challenging, but how do you influence someone even on the phone with a personal lines person quickly? How do you connect with them? How do you show them that you know their stuff? So the evidence is the facts as opposed to, oh, here's your quote. Right? Here's the fact. Here's what coverage is here. Here's what coverage is there. Right? What's the credibility? Oh, yes, ma'am. I've been, doing this work for 15 years and I understand this policy really well. And so let me explain it to you. Right? So really showcasing your skills and the skills of your team and playing into the emotional piece, right? How do you understand the person there, give them what they need? What is it that's going to get them? So if they're talking about their son or their daughter or whatever, how do you play into that in the sense of a risk piece? Or how, my gosh, you've got a lot going on there. What coverage do you need for them? Playing that sort of emotional card is not a bad thing because it makes people feel comfortable. If people do that with me and they say, Heather, I can imagine how stressful it is with 2 kids and a new dog and whatever, it makes me feel connected to them. And if they say, I can see actually something else that you haven't considered in coverage now that we've talked about it, and what about this? Oh gosh, that happened to me recently. I had no idea that type of coverage existed, but it played into me being a parent, but also, having other challenges and things going on through houses and whatever. So it really makes a difference in terms of influence because it's not always the price. So keep thinking about that too. If someone's stuck on price, how do you use other things to influence them in a way that they can go back even to another party within their company or their family member and say, hey, this really needs to happen because I trust them. And my father, for example, paid for years. He paid insurance higher than someone else. And I said, oh, it's great, Dad. I love my broker. He's like, I love my broker. I go in, we have a chat once a year. We talk about things. And he said, I know they know what they're doing because he had one claim, I guess, in 15 years or something. And he just felt that confidence. So, that little understanding that and understanding that relationship makes all the difference in the world because the credibility balance, right? That's already there. And as well, when if someone's been in business with you, so it's personal or commercial lines, and they're in business with you for 10 years, deep down unless something goes off the wall, right, and they have a claim and something goes haywire, they generally want to stay with you. It's no different with employees. When I work with organizations and they're having competitions for senior levels, as an example, most times, if they've asked someone internally, hey, you should apply for this, they really want them to win. They really want to give you the business. So if the credibility balance is there, it really makes a big difference. And that's where other team members can help as well. All right, for time, I think we're right on the money here. Wow, that never happens with me. It's a big topic. I'm hoping you had a couple of things that you pull out of it. We all fail at these things. They don't always work out perfectly, and like a perfect win-win is super challenging. But I would say just try something a little different. A lot of times I find folks, it's the emotional side that really kicks in and people can shift on in terms of connecting with people and not overreacting, right? So anyway, so thank you very much. So in our next one now before the summer hits is on respectful workplace. And just so you know, with that one, I think what I'm going to do is I'll talk about it in general. So in terms of what it is and, how you need to be that way, but I'll also bring in, if there's anyone in your organizations that could be helpful, how you can actually bring in a respectful workplace program that works. because I've worked a lot in that space when things go well and also when things hit the fan. So feel free to bring in any questions or shoot them through the chat for that one as well. If there's other people involved in that, maybe they could come on the line as well. Happy to have as many as makes sense for you. So have a lovely couple of weeks, or week, I think. I think I'm on next week possibly to start with that one. And enjoy your day. Thanks so much, everyone.